German commanders thought American supply lines were a joke. They sat in their war rooms, smoking cigars, laughing at how the Americans would never be able to feed their armies across France. But then something happened that made those same generals go silent. A convoy so massive, so fast, that it turned their entire strategy upside down, and most people have never heard of it. August 1944. The Allies just broke out of Normandy. Patton's Third Army is tearing through France like a freight train on fire. But there's a problem, a massive problem. His tanks are running on fumes, his trucks are empty, his men are hungry, and the nearest supply depot is 400 miles behind him on the beaches of Normandy. The Germans know this, they're counting on it, because no army in history has ever sustained a high-speed advance across that much territory that fast. It's impossible, the math doesn't work, the logistics don't exist, but what the Germans didn't count on was 6,000 trucks, 23,000 men, and a supply operation so crazy, so dangerous, that even the people running it thought it might fail. This is the story of the Red Ball Express and how it changed everything. Let's rewind a bit. June the 6th, 1944, D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. American, British, and Canadian forces storm the beaches of Normandy. It's brutal, thousands die, but they get a foothold. They push inland. By late July, they're still fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy, bleeding for every single field, every small town. Then comes Operation Cobra. Late July, the breakout. American forces punch through German lines. Suddenly, the static warfare of the hedgerows explodes into a war of movement. Patton's Third Army activates on August the 1st, and Patton does what Patton does best. He attacks fast, aggressive, no mercy. Within days, his tanks are 50 miles ahead, then 100 miles, then 200. The German army in France is collapsing. Towns are falling without a fight. The road to Paris is open. This is exactly what the Allies wanted, a rapid advance. Keep the Germans off balance. Don't let them regroup. Push, push, push. But here's the thing nobody talks about when they study these grand campaigns. Armies don't run on courage. They don't run on tactics. They run on beans, bullets, and gasoline. And Patton's army was burning through all three at a rate nobody had planned for. Think about it. One American armored division in World War II needed about 300,000 gallons of fuel per day. Just one division. Patton had multiple divisions. Then there's ammunition, food, medical supplies, spare parts for tanks and trucks, replacement uniforms, cigarettes because soldiers need cigarettes, mail from home, because morale matters. All of this has to come from somewhere. And where is it coming from? The beaches of Normandy. Specifically, a place called Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. That's where the supplies are being unloaded from ships, mountains of supplies, entire fields covered in crates and barrels and boxes. But here's the catch. The Allies don't have a major port. The Germans destroyed the ports before they retreated. Cherbourg, the nearest port, was captured but completely wrecked. It would take months to repair, so everything is coming across the beaches, which is slow, really slow. And even if you get the supplies off the ships, you have another problem. You have to move them 400 miles inland to where the fighting is happening, through roads that are bombed, through towns that are rubble, through terrain that wasn't built for this kind of traffic. The original plan was that by this point in the war, the Allies would have advanced about 100 miles inland, maybe 150. They had built their logistics system around that assumption. Nice, steady, controlled advance, supply depots every 50 miles, railroads repaired as you go, plenty of time to organize everything. But Patton didn't get that memo. Or maybe he did, and just threw it in the trash. By mid-August, his lead units are 400 miles from the beaches. Some units are even farther. He's in Chartres. He's approaching the Seine River. He's on the outskirts of Paris. This is way ahead of schedule, way ahead of what anyone thought was possible. And that's when the supply system starts to break. Here's what's happening. Trucks are being sent from the beaches loaded with supplies. They drive to forward supply dumps. They unload. Then they drive back to the beaches for more supplies. Simple, right? Except the roads are chaos. You've got military convoys mixing with civilian refugees. You've got bombed-out bridges that force long detours. You've got traffic jams that stretch for miles. And every time a truck breaks down, which happens constantly because these trucks are being pushed way beyond their limits, it creates another bottleneck. Fuel is the big one. Tanks eat fuel. A Sherman tank gets about 1 mile per gallon. 1 mile per gallon. And Patton's tanks are driving dozens of miles every day, sometimes over 100 miles in a single day. Do the math. It's insane. By late August, Patton's tanks are literally running out of gas, not because the fuel doesn't exist, it's sitting on the beaches, millions of gallons of it, but it's not getting to the front fast enough. The trucks can't keep up. Patton is furious. He's screaming at anyone who will listen. He knows he has the Germans on the run. He knows that if he can just keep pushing, he can end this war by Christmas, maybe even sooner, but his tanks are sitting still. His men are watching the Germans escape, and all because of logistics. The brass back at headquarters are getting desperate. They're looking at maps, they're running numbers, and the numbers are not good. At the current rate, they can't sustain the advance. Something has to change, fast. And that's when someone has an idea, a crazy idea. What if we just dedicated every available truck to one single mission? Forget everything else. Forget the careful planning. Forget the standard procedures. Just load trucks with fuel and ammo and food and drive them to Patton's army as fast as humanly possible. Non-stop. Around the clock. No breaks. It's desperate. It's risky. It might not even work, but they don't have another option. And so, on August the 25th, 1944, the Red Ball Express is born. The name Red Ball Express comes from railroad terminology. In the railroads, a red ball was an express freight train that had priority over everything else. Right of way, no stops, maximum speed. That's exactly what this truck convoy was going to be. Maximum priority, maximum speed, no matter what. The plan is simple in theory. Create a dedicated highway system. One route for trucks going to the front loaded with supplies. A different route for trucks coming back empty. No civilian traffic allowed. No other military traffic unless absolutely necessary. Just red ball trucks. Mark all the routes with red balls so everyone knows these roads are off limits. They scrape together every truck they can find. Deuce and a halves, those 2.5-ton cargo trucks that are the backbone of the US Army's transport system. Big six-wheelers, tough machines. But even tough machines have limits, and these trucks are about to be pushed past theirs. Now here's something really important that gets left out of a lot of history books. About 75% of the drivers in the Red Ball Express are black soldiers. At this time, the US military is still segregated. Black soldiers are mostly kept in support roles, not because they can't fight, obviously, but because of racism. Plain and simple. So when they need drivers for this massive supply operation, they pull from black transportation companies. These men are going to drive through hell. They're going to face dangers that most people back home will never hear about. And they're going to do it with almost no recognition. But we'll get to that. The routes are marked, the trucks are ready, the drivers get their orders. Your job is to drive from the beaches to the forward supply dumps, load up, drive east, unload, drive back west, load up again, repeat. Do this as many times as you can. Don't stop unless you absolutely have to. If your truck breaks down, fix it on the side of the road if possible. If you can't fix it, leave it and catch a ride with another truck. Keep moving. The goal is to haul 75,000 tons of supplies to the front every single day. That's 150 million pounds per day. It's an absurd number. Nobody thinks they can actually hit that number. but they're going to try. The first convoys roll out on August 25th. Trucks as far as you can see, hundreds of them, then thousands. It's one of those sights that would be incredible if you saw it. Just this endless river of military trucks, bumper to bumper, kicking up dust, engines roaring, heading east into the unknown. The drivers are working insane hours. Some of them are behind the wheel for 20 hours straight. Maybe they get a few hours of sleep, if they're lucky. Then back in the truck, drive, unload, drive back, load, drive again, over and over, day after day. And it's dangerous, really dangerous. These roads are targets. German planes, what's left of the Luftwaffe, they know these supply routes are critical, so they attack. Strafing runs, bombing runs. The Red Ball convoys lose trucks to air attacks. Men die. Then there's accidents. When you're driving 20 hours straight, you get tired, exhausted. Your judgment goes, trucks crash. Sometimes they flip over. Sometimes they collide with each other. In the dark, it's even worse. They're driving with minimal lights because they don't want to give German bombers an easy target. But minimal lights means you can't see well. More crashes, more injuries. Mechanical failures are constant. These trucks weren't designed to run non-stop like this. Engines overheat, transmissions fail, tires blow out, and when you're hauling heavy loads over rough roads at high speeds, things break. The mechanics are working around the clock trying to keep the fleet running. They're cannibalizing broken trucks for spare parts. They're improvising repairs with whatever they can find. But here's the thing, it's working. The supplies are getting through. Not always on time, not always in perfect condition, but they're getting through. Patton's tanks are getting fuel. His artillery is getting shells. His men are getting food. And because of that, he can keep attacking. In early September, Patton's Third Army captures city after city. Reims, Verdun, Nancy. These are names that mean something if you know World War I history. Places where armies bled for years. Patton's taking them in days because he has the supplies to keep moving. The Germans are in full retreat. They're trying to fall back to the German border, to the Siegfried Line, where they can dig in and defend. But they can't shake Patton. He's right on their heels. And the only reason he can stay on their heels is because of the trucks. The Red Ball Express. Let's talk numbers for a second. Between August the 25th and November 16th, 1944, the Red Ball Express hauls over 400,000 tons of supplies. That's £800 million. They drive over 6,000 trucks. They cover millions of miles. It's one of the largest and most successful logistics operations in military history. And it's all happening in the space of about 3 months, but it comes at a cost. The trucks are falling apart. By November, over half of the original vehicles are out of service, broken beyond quick repair. The drivers are exhausted. Some of them are literally falling asleep at the wheel. The whole operation is running on fumes and willpower. And then in mid-September, something happens that changes the equation. The Allies finally capture a major port, Antwerp, in Belgium. It's not damaged as badly as other ports. With some quick work, they can get it operational. Once Antwerp is open, ships can unload supplies much closer to the front. The supply lines get shorter. The pressure eases. On November 16th, 1944, the Red Ball Express officially shuts down. It's not needed anymore. The emergency is over. The supplies are flowing through Antwerp. The truck drivers can finally rest. But the impact of what they did, that's permanent. Here's the moment that changes everything. Late August 1944, Patton's Third Army is racing toward the Seine River. If he can cross the Seine, the road to Germany is wide open. The German army in France is shattered. This is the moment where the war in Western Europe can potentially be decided. But Patton's tanks are on empty. His supply dumps are almost dry. He's maybe 48 hours away from having to stop completely. The Germans know this. They're trying to buy time. They're trying to slow him down just long enough to set up new defensive lines. And then the Red Ball Express comes through. A massive convoy arrives. Hundreds of trucks, fuel, ammunition, food, everything Patton needs. His men start refueling the tanks immediately. They're loading shells into the artillery. They're grabbing rations and stuffing them in their pockets. Patton himself is there. He's watching the trucks roll in, and according to people who were there, he's almost emotional. This is the guy who's famous for being tough, for cursing out his own men, for slapping soldiers he thought were cowards. And he's watching these drivers, these black soldiers who have been driving for 20 hours straight through enemy territory, and he knows. He knows that without them, his advance is over. The tanks refuel. Within hours, they're moving again. They reach the Seine. They cross it. The Germans fall back. The Third Army keeps rolling. And in that moment, the Red Ball Express proves something that the German generals couldn't understand. American logistics aren't a weakness. They're a superpower. See, the Germans had a certain view of war. They believed in speed and aggression and powerful weapons, blitzkrieg, lightning war, hit hard and fast. And that works for a while. But there's something the Germans never figured out. You can have the best tanks in the world. You can have the smartest generals. You can have the bravest soldiers. But if you can't supply them, you lose. The German army in World War II was constantly struggling with logistics. They never had enough fuel. Their trucks were breaking down. They relied on horses, actual horses, to move supplies in many areas. By 1944, the German supply system is a disaster. They're running on scraps. Meanwhile, the Americans show up with a system that can deliver 400,000 tons of supplies across 400 miles in 3 months. The Germans look at that and they can't comprehend it. How is this possible? How do you organize something like that? How do you make it work? And that's the key moment. The moment when the German High Command realizes they're not just fighting an army, they're fighting an industrial machine, a country that can produce more trucks, more fuel, more bullets, more everything than Germany can possibly match. And no amount of tactical brilliance is going to overcome that. One German general, I forget which one, said something like, "The Americans are impossible to fight. Every time we destroy a tank, they bring up 3 more. Every time we blow up a supply dump, they just build another one overnight. It's like fighting the ocean." That's what the Red Ball Express represented, the unstoppable tide. Patton's advance continues through September. He's taking territory faster than the maps can keep up with. His staff officers are updating the battle maps every few hours because the front line keeps moving. The Germans are in chaos. They're trying to retreat in some kind of order, but Patton isn't giving them time. And every step of the way, the Red Ball trucks are there. Fuel arrives just before the tanks run dry. Ammo arrives just before the guns go silent. It's not perfect. Sometimes there are delays. Sometimes units have to wait, but the system holds. Barely, but it holds. By the end of September, Patton's Third Army is at the German border. Think about that. On D-Day, they're fighting on the beaches of Normandy. 4 months later, they're on the border of Germany itself. That's over 400 miles. In 4 months. In World War I, armies fought for 4 years and barely moved 50 miles. The Red Ball Express made this possible. Now here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. When the Red Ball Express finally shuts down in November, the drivers go back to their regular units. No medals, no parades, no recognition. Most of them will go the rest of their lives without anyone knowing what they did. Black soldiers in a segregated army doing one of the most important jobs of the entire war, and nobody talks about it. It's not until decades later that historians start piecing together the full story. Interviewing the veterans who are still alive, looking at the records, realizing just how critical this operation was. And by then, most of the men who drove those trucks are gone. They never got to see their story told properly. But the military learned. After World War II, the US Army completely redesigned its logistics system based on lessons from the Red Ball Express. They realized that in modern war, logistics isn't just important, it's everything. You can have the best weapons and the best soldiers, but if you can't get supplies to them, you're done. That's why, to this day, the US military has the most advanced logistics system in the world. It all traces back to those 23,000 men driving trucks through France in 1944. They wrote the playbook. They proved it could be done. So let's step back and look at the bigger picture. The German generals who laughed at American logistics, they weren't stupid. They were looking at traditional military thinking. In their experience, no army could sustain a high-speed advance over that kind of distance. The math didn't work. History said it was impossible. But they were thinking about war the old way. They were thinking about armies that moved on railroads and horses, armies that needed time to consolidate and reorganize, armies that followed predictable patterns. What they didn't account for was the American way of doing things, the willingness to throw out the rulebook when the situation demands it, the ability to organize thousands of vehicles and tens of thousands of men into a single coordinated effort in a matter of days, the industrial capacity to produce enough trucks and fuel and spare parts to keep the whole thing running even when half the vehicles are broken. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a supply line, it was a statement. It said that America could outproduce, out-organize, and out-sustain any opponent. The Germans had better tanks, better tactics, and more experienced generals. But none of that mattered when they couldn't keep their army supplied. Patton's famous quote was, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks gotta have gas." He understood that logistics wins wars, and the Red Ball Express gave him the gas he needed. By the time the operation ended in November 1944, the war was basically decided. Germany was still fighting, and they'd fight for another 6 months, but the outcome wasn't in doubt anymore. The Allies had proven they could advance faster, hit harder, and sustain operations longer than the Germans could respond to. That's all logistics. That's all supply chain management. That's all the boring stuff that doesn't make it into the movies. But it's the stuff that wins wars. The men who drove those trucks, they were heroes in the truest sense. They weren't on the front lines getting shot at, but they were driving through danger every single day. They were exhausted, they were scared, they were pushed to their limits, and they kept going. Because they knew that if they didn't, soldiers would die. The advance would stop. The war would drag on. When you think about World War II, you probably think about D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge or the fall of Berlin. Big, dramatic moments. But wars aren't won in single moments. They're won through sustained effort, through doing the hard, unglamorous work day after day, through keeping the machine running even when everything is falling apart. That's what the Red Ball Express was. The machine that kept the war machine running. And if you ever hear someone say that logistics is boring or that supply lines don't matter, you can tell them about August 1944, when 6,000 trucks and 23,000 men changed the course of history, when black soldiers, who weren't even allowed to fight alongside white soldiers, saved an entire army from grinding to a halt. When a desperate, improvised plan worked so well that it became the template for modern military logistics. The German generals stopped laughing pretty quickly because they realized they weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an entire nation's industrial power, organized into one unstoppable force, and there was no defense against that, no tactic, no strategy. When one side can deliver 400,000 tons of supplies across hundreds of miles while under fire, while fighting a war, while doing the impossible as a matter of routine, you can't win that fight. The Red Ball Express ran for 82 days. That's less than 3 months. But in that time, it delivered more supplies than most armies in history used in entire campaigns. It kept Patton's advance going when everyone said it couldn't be done. It proved that American logistics were not just good, they were game-changing. And maybe most importantly, it showed that the people doing the support jobs, the people who aren't firing the guns, they're just as important as anyone on the front line. The drivers, the mechanics, the guys loading the trucks at the beaches, the guys directing traffic at intersections, all of them were part of something bigger. War is hell, they say, and it is. But war is also about organization, about planning, about getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time. The Red Ball Express was better at that than anyone else in history, and that's why Patton made it to Germany. That's why the war in Europe ended in May 1945 instead of dragging on into 1946 or 1947, because somebody figured out how to move £800 million of supplies across France in 3 months, because 23,000 men got in trucks and drove until they couldn't drive anymore, and then kept driving. Because when the situation looked impossible, somebody said, "We're doing it anyway," and made it happen. That's the story the German generals didn't understand. That's the story that doesn't fit into neat military theories. That's the story of how American logistics won World War II in Europe. The Red Ball Express, 6,000 trucks, 23,000 heroes, and the supply line that changed everything. If you want to hear more stories like this, hit subscribe.